driving late night on a weekend, maybe around 2 a.m. I picked up a very attractive young girl from a house party. I would guess she is in her early 20s. She gets in the back seat and is talking on her phone to whom I presume is her boyfriend and sounds a little tipsy. She says something along the lines of, "I'm in an Uber and on my way, babe." She then hangs up and within a couple of minutes just fell asleep. Pretty common when Uber driving late at night. We arrive to her destination. I look back and say okay, we are here. She's is totally knocked out and doesn't budge. So again but louder I say, "Hey, we are here at your destination. Time to go." Nothing. At this point I'm a little apprehensive. Per Uber, you definitely do not want to touch people just as a rule, and especially if someone is asleep. So I can't just reach over and shake her or whack her on the head. I am now trying to politely yell, if that makes sense. I purposefully crank the radio and am basically shouting at her to wake up, and she's knocked out. After a few minutes she finally wakes up and, drunkenly confused with her eyes half open, said the most terrifying thing I could hear. "Who are you? Where am I?" I calmly told her that I picked her up from a house party and I am her Uber driver. I can tell it's not registering as she's half awake and most likely drunk. I repeated it to her, and she's looking out the window asking where we are. I told her she hopped in my car and this is the destination that I was to drop off at. The fear was of course someone accusing you of being a perv. I tried to be as respectful as possible to everyone and was in a tough spot trying to wake up a drunk half-naked young girl. She wore the world's shortest mini-skirt/dress, in my backseat in a dark alley in Long Beach at 3 a.m. Would not look good to anyone else passing by. After a few awkward moments she stumbles out of my car, with her bare ass showing as her skirt had ridden up. She wasn't wearing underwear, and it happened so quick I couldn't help but look. She slams my door and walks away. Takes her a few steps before she hikes down her skirt. That went as well as it could have, I suppose, but it made me fearful for a few minutes. The scene looked bad and no one wants to be accused of doing something wrong. There's a lot of bad things that can go down in situations like this, and I totally understand women's apprehension when it comes to riding in a stranger's car at night. Ladies should definitely be more careful leaving a party drunk in the middle of the night. The taxi ride started innocuously enough. My colleague and I, two young women, had just wrapped up a meeting and some shopping before heading to the airport. As I stepped into the cab from the train station, I expected the usual silent ride, perhaps with some light conversation about the weather or traffic. However, what transpired next was far from ordinary. The driver began chatting as soon as we settled into the back seat. He asked where we were from, engaging in small talk as most drivers do. But then, his tone shifted, and he made a startling proclamation. Coming from the north of Finland, he declared, meant that we were worthier and deeper people than those from the south. And because of this perceived superiority, he felt compelled to disclose things to us that he wouldn't share with others. At first, my colleague and I exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. But as the ride continued, the conversation took a dark turn. The driver started recounting bizarre and disturbing encounters he claimed to have had with both Jesus and Satan. He described these encounters in vivid detail, his voice filled with a strange mixture of reverence and fear. My colleague and I exchanged nervous glances, silently willing the ride to end as quickly as possible. Every passing moment only added to the growing sense of unease filling the confined space of the cab. I tried to maintain a facade of polite interest, nodding along and uttering non-committal responses while internally grappling with rising fear. Then, the driver dropped a bombshell that sent shivers down our spines. He calmly revealed that the devil had instructed him to take his own life and to take 2 other people with him. My blood ran cold as his words hung in the air, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of the threat hanging over us. Frozen with fear, I couldn't bring myself to take any meaningful action. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity, as I silently prayed for the nightmare to end. I was convinced that I would never make it out alive, trapped in the clutches of this deranged stranger behind the wheel. Then, suddenly, the taxi pulled up to the airport, jolting me out of my terrified reverie. The driver let us out at the wrong terminal, insisting that it would be a better stop for us. Grateful for any opportunity to escape, I stumbled out of the cab, offering profuse thanks as I hurriedly made my way inside. Once safely inside the airport, my colleague and I collapsed into each other's arms, shaken to the core by the ordeal we had just endured. The adrenaline-fueled rush of relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the lingering trauma of what had transpired in that taxi. As I made my way to my gate, neither of us could shake the feeling of dread that clung to us like a suffocating cloak. The encounter with the unhinged taxi driver would haunt me for days to come, a stark reminder of the thin veneer of safety that separates us from the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. The evening sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of downtown. It was rush hour, and the city was alive with the hum of traffic and the chatter of pedestrians. Amidst the chaos, I stood on the curb, waiting for the taxi I had ordered to arrive and whisk me away to the comfort of my home. Minutes passed, turning into what felt like an eternity as I watched car after car pass by, none of them the taxi I had called for. Frustration gnawed at me as I glanced at my watch, realizing that I was already running late for dinner with friends. Just as I was about to give up hope, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb in front of me. The window rolled down, revealing the driver inside, a middle-aged man with a slicked back hair and a charming smile. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. I hesitated, my instincts telling me to wait for the taxi I had ordered, but impatience won out in the end. "Sure," I replied, opening the door and sliding into the plush leather seat beside him. As we merged into the sea of cars, the driver struck up a conversation, his tone friendly and casual at first. We exchanged pleasantries, discussing the weather and the state of the city. But as we continued on our journey, the tone of the conversation took a dark turn. "Are you married?" he asked suddenly, his eyes fixed on me in the rearview mirror. The question caught me off guard, but I answered politely, hoping to steer the conversation back to safer topics. However, the driver seemed undeterred, pressing for more personal details with each passing mile. "Do you have children?" he continued, his voice taking on a sinister edge. "How long have you been married? Does your husband like to have sex?" I recoiled in shock, my heart racing as I realized the true nature of the driver's intentions. Panic surged through me as I searched for a way out of the increasingly uncomfortable situation. At the next red light, the driver turned in his seat, his gaze lingering on me with unsettling intensity. "Have you ever wanted to get satisfaction elsewhere?" he asked, his words dripping with malice. I froze, my mind racing as I struggled to comprehend the danger I was in. This was no ordinary ride home. I was trapped in a car with a predator, his intentions as clear as day. Desperation clawed at me as I frantically searched for an escape route. With trembling hands I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling with the lock screen as I dialed 911. Sorry, I have to take this," I stammered, my voice trembling as I brought the phone to my ear. "It's an emergency." The driver's eyes narrowed in suspicion, but I ignored him, focusing all of my attention on the call as I spoke rapidly to the dispatcher on the other end of the line. With each passing second, my fear grew, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed for help to arrive. But just as I thought I couldn't bear another moment in the suffocating silence of the car, relief flooded through me as the dispatcher assured me that help was on the way. With a shaky exhale, I hung up the phone, my hands still trembling as I turned to face the driver. "I need you to pull over," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor of fear beneath the surface. "I'm getting out." The driver's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold calculation as he considered my request. For a moment, I feared he would refuse, trapping me in the car with him for God knows how long. But then, to my immense relief, he nodded, his expression unreadable as he complied with my demand. As the car came to a stop on the side of the road, I wasted no time in flinging open the door and scrambling out onto the pavement. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled away from the car, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fought to put as much distance between myself and the driver as possible. But my relief was short-lived, replaced by a surge of anger as I realized the true extent of the danger I had narrowly escaped. Turning back to face the car, I glared at the driver, my voice trembling with fury as I demanded that he let me go. "You can't just leave me here!" he shouted, his voice laced with desperation as he reached for the door handle. "You have to pay for the ride!" But I was already done with him, done with the fear and the uncertainty that had plagued me since the moment I had stepped into his car. With a final glare, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving the driver behind in the darkness of the night. As I navigated the dimly lit streets of the town, the glow of the university's lights faded behind me, leaving only patches of darkness punctuated by the occasional street lamp. The town was a peculiar mix of bustling student life and quiet residential areas, with the former dominating the landscape. So, when a ride request came from a residential neighborhood, it caught my attention. The address stood out among the typical landscape of student housing and affluent residences. It belonged to a working-class household, a rarity in this part of town. As I approached, I noticed the lights inside the house casting shifting shadows behind the blinds. Movement stirred within, but it wasn't until the last moments of the allotted 5-minute window that the door flung open with a force that echoed in the stillness of the night. A man emerged, towering and burly, without a word of acknowledgement to my greeting. His staggering gait and vacant expression hinted at a state of intoxication bordering on oblivion. I hesitated to confirm the address, sensing instinctively that engaging further with him would only prolong an uncomfortable encounter. Reluctantly, I verified the destination, and he slouched into the car. The noxious odor that accompanied him assaulted my senses, a cocktail of cat urine, stale cigarettes, and unidentified chemicals. Hastily rolling down the windows did little to dispel the stench, and I resigned myself to the inevitable task of cleansing my car seats with the most potent deodorizing spray I possessed. In the midst of the overpowering smell, the man attempted to engage in conversation. His speech was a disjointed medley of slurred words and incomprehensible ramblings. His topics careened from nostalgic reminiscences of childhood to expressions of hatred towards his employer, punctuated by erratic mood swings reminiscent of stories I'd heard about encounters with individuals under the influence of potent drugs. As we approached the destination indicated on the app, his agitation seemed to escalate. I braced myself for a potentially volatile situation. Parking the car, I announced our arrival, but he remained unresponsive, fixating on some unseen object on the floor of the car. Fearing the worst, I positioned my hand on the seat belt release and the other on the door latch, ready to exit at a moment's notice if the situation took a dangerous turn. Only after several attempts did I manage to rouse him, prompting him to disembark and mutter cryptic words about peace and resolution. Locking the doors behind him, I hastily drove away, breathing a sigh of relief as I put distance between myself and the unsettling encounter. With a sense of urgency, I reported the incident to emergency services and provided a detailed account to the rideshare company, grateful to have safely navigated a potentially perilous situation on the darkened streets of the town. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered after that encounter. The man's vacant stare haunted my thoughts, and I found myself wondering about the mysteries hidden behind those shadowed eyes. What demons lurked within him, driving him to such depths of despair and intoxication? And what unseen dangers might lie in wait for unsuspecting travelers in the quiet corners of the town? Despite my best efforts to push aside those troubling thoughts, they continued to nag at me, gnawing away at my peace of mind like a persistent itch that refused to be ignored. I found myself avoiding that particular neighborhood, steering clear of the dimly lit streets where shadows danced and whispered secrets to those willing to listen. But try as I might to distance myself from that unsettling encounter, its memory lingered like a specter in the corners of my mind, a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the seemingly ordinary world. And as I continued to drive through the dimly lit streets of the town, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors might be waiting just beyond the reach of my headlights, hidden in the shadows that stretched out into the night. I could go on and on about some pretty outlandish encounters I've experienced as an Uber driver: drunk girls grabbing my crotch, drunk people almost throwing up in my car, being asked to come party with people. But there is one particular incident that comes to mind. Not only was it strange, but it was undoubtedly the most terrifying experience I have had to date. I remember it as if it happened just yesterday. It was a pretty busy Saturday night in downtown Pittsburgh. I live in the suburbs outside the city, but always went into the city because that's where the business is to maximize income potential. I received a ride notification from a man named Brian. He was in a pretty popular bar and parking was a nightmare, so I had to stay in the middle of the street, for the most part, to wait for him. Shortly after the notification came in, he called my cell phone and asked, "Is this Rob, my Uber driver?" I said yes. He then said, "Rob, I'm calling out a favor. My friends and I wanted to secure an Uber driver before we have maybe one more drink. If you are able to wait outside for just a few more minutes, I'd be happy to pay you cash on top of your fare for the wait." I had my concerns because that put me at a standstill where I'd be losing money. I told him this, and he told me that other drivers would not meet this request, but he would appreciate it if I did. I reluctantly agreed and told him I'd wait no more than 10 minutes. He was elated and profusely thanked me. Miraculously, I found a parking space nearby, and set out to wait for Brian. He called back a few minutes later to ask what kind of car I had so that he'd know what to look for, and said he'd be out in just a few more minutes. Sure. No problem. No sooner than when I hung up the phone, my back passenger door opened and a man nonchalantly sat down in my back seat. I asked, "Are you Brian?" To which he said yes. I remembered the smell of booze strongly emanating from him, indicating he was quite inebriated. "Okay, Brian, where are we headed? You didn't put a destination into the app," he said. "Just go." I reiterated that the longer he's in my car the more he will be charged, so I recommended him putting in a destination, or at least tell me so that I could put it in for him. Once again he said, "Just go. Drive. I'll let you know." I agreed. I had a sneaking suspicion something wasn't right, but I went against my better judgment, and went ahead and drove away. About 2 minutes into the ride, my phone rang. "Rob, where are you? Who's this?" I asked. "Rob, this is Brian. We're waiting outside for you." At this point, my heart sank. I asked, "If you're there, then who the hell is in my car?" He replied, "I don't know what's going on, Rob, but it sounds like you picked up the wrong guy. Good luck, I'll just request another ride." Upon hanging up, I looked in my rear-view mirror and was met with the coldest stare from a human being I have ever seen. He was smirking at me. Keep in mind, I had only been an Uber driver for a few months and had never experienced something of this magnitude before. I was literally so terrified that I couldn't think coherently to call the cops. I usually use my own car for Uber driving, which has OnStar GPS and a panic button for emergencies. But it was snowing that night, and I took my wife's SUV, which wasn't equipped with OnStar. "You're not Brian, are you?" I finally calmly asked this creepy-ass intruder in my car. "Of course I'm Brian. Who else would I be?" He spoke with the smoothness of a serial killer. He stared back at me through the rearview mirror with a cold, soul-penetrating glare. I knew I had to go along with it to keep myself safe. I made the decision to humor him and get him to where he wanted to go so I could get rid of him all the quicker and wake up from this nightmare. I said, "Okay, Brian, where are we headed?" He requested to go to Mount Washington, a part of Pittsburgh high on a hill that overlooks the city, and about a 10-minute drive from where we were. My heart was pounding. I started wondering if he was carrying a weapon, if he was criminally insane, violent, or just some stupid drunk that saw my Uber sticker and decided to steal a free ride. So many thoughts and feelings were going through my mind at once, all while he stared at me through the rear-view mirror with that same serial killer smirk on his face. I like to think I have impeccable people skills. I decided to start a conversation with him to try to lighten him up a bit in a desperate attempt to find a shred of humanity in him so he wouldn't kill me. "So, Brian, what do you do for a living?" I asked. "I'm business," was all he replied in a monotone voice. That made absolutely no sense to me. He leaned forward in the back seat to where his head was then close to mine, and with the heavy smell of booze emanating through the air, he said it over again a few more times. "I'm business. I'm business." We finally got to Mount Washington and I asked for the exact location. He pointed to a tall apartment building on the main drag that overlooks the city skyline. I pulled up in front and put the car in park. This guy proceeded to put his head down and laugh in a sinister, bone-chilling fashion. It started low, then rang through the car like thunder. "I'm just kidding," he told me. Then he brought his head up in between the seats again, pointed to another building down the street, and said, "I live there." By this point, I'm on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. I know I should have called the cops way before this, but I was honestly too terrified to. I simply drove down to the next apartment building praying he'd finally get out and end this twisted game he was playing with me. Luckily, he did. He got right out and stumbled on down the path to this apartment building. I quickly drove off thanking my lucky stars that I was still alive to go home to my wife and kids. I thought about this a long, hard while. Was he just some drunk that unscrupulously took advantage of me to get a ride home? Was he really a dangerous man who could have killed me but decided not to because I stayed calm and went along with his sick game? Was that even where he lived? Did I possibly endanger another random person by dropping him off near that apartment building? I sure hope not, but I'll never know. In case anyone is wondering, I emailed Uber and explained the situation. The original Brian was refunded the full amount for the ride, so he did not pay for that stolen ride. If anyone thinks they would have done something differently, seriously, think about it for a moment. Put yourself in that position. It's easy for someone to say they wouldn't tolerate it, or that they'd be the badass that would have kicked him out and called the cops right in front of him, but I was honestly scared for my life. I stayed calm and did what I thought I had to do, and I don't regret how I handled him. From that point on, I changed how I approach every rider that gets in my car by strongly verifying their identity first. I will not let it happen again. My craziest taxi episode was when my wife, Penny, and I flew to her mom's house in Grosse Pointe, Michigan for Christmas. The Detroit airport is about 40 miles from the city. I knew from previous trips the taxi fare is typically $52. As I exited the airport baggage area, I looked towards the waiting line of taxis. These drivers had likely been waiting in line up to an hour for their turn at a fare. I spotted a taxi that had just arrived in the pickup area to get in line. I approached him and offered, "My wife and I are going to 4664 Hidden Lane in Grosse Pointe. I'll save you the long waiting time and you don't have to turn the meter on and share the fare with your dispatcher if you agree to take us there for a flat fee of $40. He agreed and loaded our 2 suitcases in his trunk. As we exited the parking area, he flipped up the meter flag, starting the fare charge. I asked, "Why are you starting the meter? You agreed to the flat rate of $40. He ignored me and drove on. I said, "If you don't want to stick to our agreement, take us back immediately. I don't care what the meter says, I'm not going to pay a cent more than the $40 we agreed to." He continued to drive in silence. I made a point of writing down all his taxi license info posted on the dashboard. His name looked like something from Eastern Europe and he had a heavy accent. The trip usually takes about 45 minutes. As we got within a few miles of our exit, he said, "I'm going to drop you off at the next exit." I said, "Try it and you'll get nothing from me." He said, "I'm going to call the police." I said, "Go ahead. I got nothing to do for the rest of the afternoon, how about you?" He drove on to the right exit in silence. He soon passed the street leading to Penny's mom's house. I said, "You should have turned right at that last street." He kept driving. I said, "You better be heading to the police department." Having called his bluff, he turned around and took us to Penny's mom's house. When we got there, I got out and was about to pay him the $40, but I noticed Penny wasn't getting out of the cab. I asked her, "Are you getting out?" Penny said, "Not until he removes our luggage from the trunk." Oh crap, I thought. I'd forgotten about that. I was glad I'd married a gal smarter than me. I told Penny, "I'll get back in and you get out until he takes our luggage out." It became apparent he intended to drive off with our luggage when we both got out. Instead, the driver put the cab in gear and started driving away from Penny's mom's house with me in the back seat. I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Back to the airport." I said, "That's fine with me. By the way, in this country, this is called kidnapping. You'll not receive 1 cent from me." At this point I opened the rear door on the driver's side and held it wide open with my outstretched left foot, as we drove down the snow-covered street. An approaching garbage truck almost sheared the door off had the taxi driver not swerved to the right, almost hitting a parked car. My driver yelled, "Shut the door!" I said, "Screw you, we're going all the way to the airport with it wide open or until the first oncoming vehicle tears it off. Hey, is your insurance up to date?" In the meantime, the next 2 cars approaching us had to swerve to their right to avoid hitting the door. He had no choice. He pulled over at the end of the block, turned off the cab and demanded, "Give me my money!" I said, "You'll get the $40 we agreed to after you unload my luggage." He was extremely pissed. He got out of the cab, went around to the trunk, grabbed my first suitcase and heaved it into the snowy front yard of the house next to us. As he was pulling my other suitcase out of the trunk, I leaned over the back of the driver's seat in front of me and pulled his keys from the ignition. He was busy throwing my second suitcase into the same yard. Outside the cab, he came face to face with me and demanded, "Now give me my damn money!" I had 2 $20 bills in my hand. I folded both of them in half, then in half again, ripped them in half and tossed the 8 pieces out, into the busy, snowy street. The traffic scattered the pieces amidst the wet slush and passing vehicles. His eyes almost bugged out. As he scrambled on his knees for the fluttering, wet currency pieces, I retrieved both my suitcases and started walking back to Penny's mom's house, a block away. Fortunately, both suitcases had wheels. The driver got back in the cab with his soggy, shredded bills, and discovered his keys missing. He got back out and yelled, "Where are my keys?" By this time, I'd walked about 100 feet away, pulling my luggage. I turned towards him, held up his ring of keys and dangled them over my head and jingled them. I answered, "Oh, these? Here, catch!" and flung them high up on the snow-covered roof of the house where he'd thrown my luggage. I continued on my way. I wondered if upon his return to the airport he considered booking a flight back to Budapest. It was an easy 4-minute walk back to Penny's mom's house. Penny's mom knew nothing of the cab situation. Minutes later, I was delighted to be greeted by Penny and her mom. As I entered her house, I looked back outside, smiled broadly and cheerily quipped, "You know, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas." As the cab pulled away from the bustling streets of New York City, my friend and I settled into the back seat, ready for a quiet ride back to our hotel after a night of revelry. The city's neon lights flickered outside, casting eerie shadows on the dimly lit streets, as we navigated through the maze of buildings. At first, the ride was uneventful. We exchanged tired smiles and casual chatter, reminiscing about the highlights of our evening. But as the minutes passed, the atmosphere in the cab began to shift, growing tense and uneasy. It started with subtle cues, a nervous twitch of the cab driver's hands, a hesitant glance in the rearview mirror. Then, without warning, he began to speak, his voice low and ominous. "You know," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife, "I've always been fascinated by serial killers." My friend and I exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond to the sudden change in tone. We had expected a quiet ride home, not a conversation about the darkest corners of the human psyche. But the driver seemed oblivious to our discomfort, launching into a chilling monologue about infamous murderers and their gruesome crimes. He spoke with an unsettling mixture of fascination and admiration, detailing the methods and motivations of some of history's most notorious killers. As he spoke, my mind raced with fear and confusion. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was the cab driver truly as deranged as his words suggested? I stole a glance at my friend, whose expression mirrored my own growing sense of unease. We exchanged whispered assurances, silently urging each other to remain calm until we reached our destination. But the cab driver showed no signs of stopping. He continued to regale us with tales of horror and depravity, his voice growing more animated with each passing moment. "And you know what's really interesting?" he said, his eyes glittering with a strange intensity. "Most serial killers have the middle name Wayne." My blood ran cold at his words, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Was he implying that he shared something in common with these monsters? Or was it just a bizarre coincidence? I glanced out the window, desperate for a glimpse of familiar surroundings. The streets passed by in a blur, each one more unfamiliar and foreboding than the last. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cab came to a stop outside our hotel. My friend and I exchanged a look of profound relief, our hearts pounding in our chests as we fumbled for our wallets. As we handed over the fare, the cab driver turned to us with a chilling smile. "I hope you enjoyed the ride," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "And remember, if you ever need a lift again, just give me a call." With a shudder, my friend and I stumbled out of the cab, our minds reeling from the surreal encounter we had just endured. We made our way into the hotel, our footsteps echoing in the empty lobby as we tried to shake off the lingering sense of dread that clung to us like a shadow. As we rode the elevator up to our floor, I couldn't help but glance back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the cab driver's sinister grin reflected in the polished metal doors. But the elevator reached our floor without incident, and we stumbled out into the hallway, grateful to be free of the cab driver's chilling presence. As we collapsed onto our beds, exhausted and shaken, I made a silent vow never to take a cab alone in the middle of the night again. And if I ever found myself in a situation like that again, I knew I would trust my instincts and get out of there as fast as humanly possible. The taxi ride began like any other. Me, a passenger in the back seat, and an anonymous driver up front. But there was something different about this ride, something that set it apart from the countless others I'd taken before. Subtlety wasn't exactly my strong suit, so when I found myself curious about the man behind the wheel, it wasn't long before I was trying to strike up a conversation. "You've been at this for a while, huh?" I remarked, gesturing vaguely towards the road ahead. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a hint of amusement. 20 years, he replied simply. I blinked in surprise. 20 years? That's quite the milestone. He nodded, a knowing smile playing on his lips. It is indeed. You pick up a thing or two in that time. I couldn't help but be intrigued. I can imagine you've seen your fair share of interesting characters over the years. He didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice low and contemplative. Once. I leaned forward slightly, eager to hear more. Just once? That must have been quite the passenger. He didn't offer any further explanation, and the conversation fell into a comfortable silence as we continued on our journey. As I glanced around the interior of the cab, my eyes were drawn to the dashboard, cluttered with an assortment of oddities, a box of Kleenex, a smattering of glitter, a pewter figurine of a bull with ruby-red eyes, and a small black and white photograph of two smiling figures. I found myself studying each item, my curiosity piqued by their presence. But before I could dwell on them further, we hit traffic, and I turned my attention to the world outside the window. As we idled in the midst of the bustling city streets, I watched the passing parade of humanity, a man in an orange beanie, a pair of young lovers lost in each other's embrace, an elderly woman casting disapproving glances their way, a storefront with a garish yellow sign proclaiming a sale, and a familiar face strolling down the sidewalk, music blaring from a portable speaker. But even as I watched the world go by, my thoughts kept returning to the enigmatic driver and the secrets he carried with him. There was something about him, something that tugged at the edges of my consciousness, begging to be explored. And as the taxi rolled on through the city streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that this ride was just the beginning of a much larger journey, one filled with mystery, intrigue, and perhaps even a hint of danger. As the cab pulled away from the bustling streets of New York City, my friend and I settled into the back seat, ready for a quiet ride back to our hotel after a night of revelry. The city's neon lights flickered outside, casting eerie shadows on the dimly lit streets as we navigated through the maze of buildings. At first, the ride was uneventful. We exchanged tired smiles and casual chatter, reminiscing about the highlights of our evening. But as the minutes passed, the atmosphere in the cab began to shift, growing tense and uneasy. It started with subtle cues, a nervous twitch of the cab driver's hands, a hesitant glance in the rearview mirror. Then, without warning, he began to speak, his voice low and ominous. "You know," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "I've always been fascinated by serial killers." My friend and I exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond to the sudden change in tone. We had expected a quiet ride home, not a conversation about the darkest corners of the human psyche. But the driver seemed oblivious to our discomfort, launching into a chilling monologue about infamous murderers and their gruesome crimes. He spoke with an unsettling mixture of fascination and admiration, detailing the methods and motivations of some of history's most notorious killers. As he spoke, my mind raced with fear and confusion. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was the cab driver truly as deranged as his words suggested? I stole a glance at my friend, whose expression mirrored my own growing sense of unease. We exchanged whispered assurances, silently urging each other to remain calm until we reached our destination. But the cab driver showed no signs of stopping. He continued to regale us with tales of horror and depravity, his voice growing more animated with each passing moment. "And you know what's really interesting?" he said, his eyes glittering with a strange intensity. "Most serial killers have the middle name Wayne." My blood ran cold at his words, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Was he implying that he shared something in common with these monsters? Or was it just a bizarre coincidence? I glanced out the window, desperate for a glimpse of familiar surroundings. The streets passed by in a blur, each one more unfamiliar and foreboding than the last. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cab came to a stop outside our hotel. My friend and I exchanged a look of profound relief, our hearts pounding in our chests as we fumbled for our wallets. As we handed over the fare, the cab driver turned to us with a chilling smile. "I hope you enjoyed the ride," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "And remember, if you ever need a lift again, just give me a call." With a shudder, my friend and I stumbled out of the cab, our minds reeling from the surreal encounter we had just endured. We made our way into the hotel, our footsteps echoing in the empty lobby as we tried to shake off the lingering sense of dread that clung to us like a shadow. As we rode the elevator up to our floor, I couldn't help but glance back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the cab driver's sinister grin reflected in the polished metal doors. But the elevator reached our floor without incident, and we stumbled out into the hallway, grateful to be free of the cab driver's chilling presence. As we collapsed onto our beds, exhausted and shaken, I made a silent vow never to take a cab alone in the middle of the night again. And if I ever found myself in a situation like that again, I knew I would trust my instincts and get out of there as fast as humanly possible. Hey there! I'm new but putting my all into sharing real horror stories. Your support is my motivation. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your comments mean the world to me. Let's make this journey together. I remember that night all too vividly, the chill in the air, the hum of the city fading into an ominous silence as I stepped into the cab in Queens. The driver's eyes bore into mine through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable, as if he held a dark secret he dared not share. I gave him my destination, but he merely nodded, his lips forming a thin line. The journey began, but the atmosphere inside the cab was thick with tension, suffocating me with its weight. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to exhaustion after a long day's work. Then, without warning, the cab veered off course, hurtling down unfamiliar streets, the city lights blurring into a chaotic whirlwind outside the windows. Panic clawed at my throat as I demanded an explanation, but the driver remained silent, his grip on the wheel unnaturally tight. Minutes stretched into eternity, each turn taking us deeper into the labyrinth of the unknown. With a sinking heart, I realized I was not the only passenger trapped in this nightmare. The driver's words pierced the silence like a dagger. The last 11 passengers never reached their destination. I should have fled then, should have leaped out into the darkness, and never looked back. But fear paralyzed me, chaining me to the seat as the cab hurtled towards an uncertain fate. Then it happened. The cab shuddered to a halt, throwing me forward with bone-jarring force. I stumbled out onto the freeway, the rush of wind tearing at my clothes as I tumbled and rolled, my screams lost in the roar of passing cars. And there, amidst the chaos, I collided with another vehicle, its twisted metal gleaming dully in the faint light. The driver, a spectral figure in the darkness, emerged from the shadows, his face a mask of terror as he whispered of 3 flat tires, of a journey cut short by unseen forces. With trembling hands I reached for my phone, desperate for salvation in a world gone mad. But there was no signal, no lifeline to the outside world. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. As I stumbled along the deserted freeway, the hours stretched into eternity, each step echoing with the hollow sound of my own heartbeat. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, whispers filled the air, a chorus of voices calling out from the darkness. And then, just when I thought I could take no more, I saw it. A figure, lurking in the shadows, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. My breath caught in my throat as it beckoned to me, a silent promise of salvation or damnation. I fled then, my feet pounding against the pavement, the echoes of my own terror driving me ever onward. But no matter how fast I ran, the darkness pursued me, a relentless specter haunting my every step. And so I walked. Walked until my feet bled, until my lungs burned with the fire of exertion, until I could walk no more. And still, the darkness followed, a silent specter lurking at the edge of my vision, waiting to claim me as its own. 3 weeks passed, each day blurring into the next as I wandered the desolate landscape of my own despair. And then, just when I had given up all hope, it came. An invoice, delivered by unseen hands, a reminder of the horrors I had endured, a testament to the darkness that lurked within us all. I should have burned it then, should have torn it to shreds and cast it into the wind. But instead I used it. Used it to wipe away the stains of my own fear, to cleanse myself of the taint of that fateful night. But some stains cannot be washed away, some fears cannot be banished so easily. And even now, as I sit alone in the darkness, I can feel it. The cold touch of unseen hands, the whispers of voices long silenced, the chill of a night that never seems to end. In the heart of the city, where the neon lights painted the streets with a kaleidoscope of colors, there lurked a darkness that few dared to acknowledge. It was a night like any other, with the pulsating rhythm of the nightclub drawing in the lost souls seeking solace in its intoxicating embrace. 3 figures emerged from the chaos of the club, 2 females, 1 male, all in their mid-20s, bound together by blood and marriage. But beneath the surface of their laughter and camaraderie simmered a tempest of resentment and strife. The brother, fueled by the fiery liquid courage that coursed through his veins, insisted on prolonging the night's revelry, while his sister and his wife, burdened by fatigue and frustration, yearned for the solace of their own sanctuary. They stumbled into the waiting car, the air thick with tension as the brother's drunken protests clashed with the silent pleading of his female companions. His demands for more time fell on deaf ears, for it was the wife who held the purse strings, and she was adamant in her refusal to fund her husband's debauchery. The engine roared to life, and the car surged forward into the labyrinth of the city streets. But amidst the cacophony of honking horns and screeching tires, a voice pierced through the chaos like a blade slicing through flesh. "Stop the car!" the brother bellowed, his words slurred and disjointed. Before anyone could react, he flung open the door and vanished into the night, a shadow swallowed by the darkness. Panic seized the hearts of the remaining passengers as they watched in horror as their companion tumbled onto the unforgiving pavement, a sacrificial offering to the asphalt gods. The screech of brakes and the blare of horns echoed in their ears as cars swerved and swelled to avoid the fallen figure. But miraculously, he rose from the ground, a specter bathed in the sickly glow of the streetlights. His limbs contorted in unnatural angles, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly fervor as he staggered towards the safety of the sidewalk. "He's fine," the wife declared, her voice a whisper of reassurance tinged with a hint of madness. "Just take us home." And so, with trembling hands and pounding hearts, they continued their journey into the abyss, the memory of the brothers' fall etched into their minds like a scar that refused to heal. But the horrors of that fateful night did not end with the brothers' escape. For in the days that followed, whispers began to spread like wildfire through the city streets, tales of a lone figure wandering the shadows, his eyes burning with a hunger that could not be sated. Some claimed to have seen him lurking in the alleys, a wraith haunting the darkest corners of the city. Others spoke of his spectral presence haunting their dreams, a silent reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that lurked within us all. And though the brother's fate remained a mystery, his disappearance served as a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked in the heart of the city, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred and the sins of the past rose from the depths to claim their rightful vengeance. The Orlando skyline welcomed me with a hazy glow as I stepped off the plane from California. The air was thick, heavy with humidity, and the promise of adventure hung in the Florida night. I hailed a cab, eager to reach my hotel and start exploring the city. The driver, a grizzled man with a weathered face, greeted me with a nod as I slid into the back seat. His eyes held a hint of mischief, like he knew secrets buried deep in the swamps that surrounded the city. "Hey there, traveler," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Planning on golfing while you're here?" I considered his question. Golfing had crossed my mind. After all, Florida was famous for its lush courses. "I might," I replied cautiously. A shadow passed over the driver's face, his expression turning serious. "If you hit your ball near the water, just leave it there." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I laughed nervously, thinking it was just a warning about losing golf balls in the ponds. "Why's that?" I asked, trying to shake off the unease creeping into my thoughts. The driver's gaze pierced through me, his eyes dead serious. "Gators, man." The cab ride continued in silence, but the driver's words lingered in the air like a sinister omen. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his warning than met the eye. The city lights blurred past as my mind raced with dark possibilities. 20 years later, the memory still haunts me. The events of that night are etched into my mind with the clarity of a nightmare. It was a sweltering afternoon when I finally mustered the courage to return to Orlando, drawn back by an inexplicable urge to confront the mysteries that had plagued me for so long. I booked a tea time at a nearby golf course, determined to uncover the truth behind the driver's cryptic warning. As I stood on the first tee, the air thick with anticipation, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at my insides. The lush fairway stretched out before me, beckoning me into the unknown. With a deep breath, I swung my club and watched as the ball sailed through the air, landing with a soft thud near the edge of a murky pond. A shiver ran down my spine as the driver's words echoed in my mind. "Gators, man." Ignoring the warning, I trudged towards the water's edge, determined to retrieve my ball and conquer my fears once and for all. But as I reached out to grab it, a ripple broke the surface, and a pair of glowing eyes fixed on me with a primal hunger. Frozen in terror, I watched as the water churned, and a monstrous creature emerged from the depths. Its scaled hide glistened in the sunlight, its jaws lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was a gator unlike any I had ever seen, a prehistoric behemoth lurking in the shadows of modern civilization. With a primal roar, the creature lunged towards me, its jaws snapping shut inches from my outstretched hand. I stumbled backward, scrambling to escape the beast's wrath as it thrashed in the water, determined to claim its prey. Heart pounding, I turned and fled, the echoes of the driver's warning ringing in my ears. The once inviting fairways now felt like a labyrinth of death, every shadow hiding a lurking menace waiting to strike. I emerged from the course battered and bruised, my spirit shattered by the horrors that lurked in the depths. The driver's words had been a harbinger of doom, a warning from a world beyond our own. To this day, I can still hear the echo of his voice, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lie hidden in the heart of darkness. And though I may never set foot on a golf course again, The memory of that fateful cab ride will haunt me until the end of my days. In the dim glow of streetlights, I drove through the labyrinthine city streets, my car a vessel ferrying passengers through the urban night. Little did I know, I was about to descend into the depths of deception and danger, where the line between trust and treachery blurred like the flickering shadows dancing on the pavement. It began innocently enough. A couple, seemingly ordinary, flagged down my car. Their smiles were warm, their manners impeccable. They requested a simple errand, a pit stop at the father's barber shop. But as the wheels of my car turned and the journey unfolded, the fabric of reality began to fray. The man's requested detour to his father's shop unraveled into a sinister scheme. A stop for money turned into a twisted game of cat and mouse, with me unwittingly becoming a pawn in their game. My trust was a noose tightening around my neck as I obediently followed their instructions, unaware of the trap closing in around me. At the gas station, the innocuous request to change a bill revealed the true nature of the duo's intentions. Like wolves in sheep's clothing, they divided the spoils and slipped away into the night, leaving behind a bewildered me and a trail of deceit. But the nightmare had only just begun. A voice, sweet as honey yet laced with poison, urged me to forsake the familiar embrace of the GPS. Entranced by her siren song, I acquiesced, unaware of the peril lurking in the shadows. With each turn, each deviation from the prescribed path, I ventured deeper into the abyss, my senses dulled by the illusion of companionship. And then, like a bolt from the blue, the truth was revealed, a chilling email from Uber, accusing me of being lost, of straying from the beaten path. The cold hand of betrayal gripped my heart as I realized the extent of the deception. They had played me like a fiddle, exploiting my trust for their own gain. But I was not one to go quietly into the night. With righteous fury burning in my veins, I penned my rebuttal, my words a clarion call in the darkness. To Uber support, I laid bare the machinations of my tormentors, demanding justice in a world gone mad. And justice, though slow to come, eventually prevailed. The fare was restored, a small victory in the face of overwhelming odds. But the scars of the ordeal remained, a testament to the dangers lurking in the shadows of the night. Yet, even as I licked my wounds and counted my blessings, another specter loomed on the horizon, a tale of deceit and deception, woven by the hands of opportunists and charlatans. In the twisted world of Uberpool, where strangers shared a journey into the unknown, a new threat emerged, a wolf in sheep's clothing, masquerading as an innocent traveler. With a few keystrokes, they altered their destination, leading me on a merry chase through the streets of the city. But their ruse would not go unchallenged. Armed with the knowledge of their deceit, I resolved to fight back, to protect myself and my passengers from the whims of fate. No longer would I be a pawn in their game, a puppet dancing on their strings. For in the heart of darkness, amidst the tangled web of lies and deception, one truth remained steadfast: the indomitable spirit of those who dared to defy the odds, to stand tall in the face of adversity. And so, dear reader, heed these words of caution as you traverse the urban jungle, for danger lurks in every shadow, and not all who smile are friends. Trust your instincts, stay vigilant, and may the light of truth guide you through the darkness. The city lay quiet under the shroud of night as I drove through its labyrinthine streets, the only sound being the soft hum of my car's engine. It was 1 a.m., and I was cruising around, waiting for the next call to come through on my rideshare app. The neon lights of bars and clubs flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow on the deserted sidewalks. As a rideshare driver, I had grown accustomed to the peculiarities of the night. Drunk passengers, late-night revelers, and the occasional odd request were all part of the job. But little did I know that this particular night would take a turn into the realms of nightmare. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence of the car. A notification flashed on the screen, a new ride request. 2 girls, stranded at a downtown bar, needed a lift home. I accepted the request and navigated towards their location. Minutes later, I pulled up outside the dimly lit establishment. The girls stumbled out, giggling and leaning on each other for support. They were clearly intoxicated, but nothing out of the ordinary for a Friday night. They climbed into the back seat, their laughter filling the car as I began the journey to their destination. The drive started off uneventfully, the girls chatting animatedly in the back seat. They were in high spirits, their words slurred and their sentences disjointed. I smiled to myself, accustomed to the antics of inebriated passengers. However, as we progressed further into the night, their behavior took a strange turn. The conversation veered into nonsensical territory, filled with wild anecdotes and bizarre exclamations. At first, I chalked it up to their drunken state, but as the minutes passed, a sense of unease began to settle in the pit of my stomach. Glancing at the rearview mirror, I caught glimpses of the girls' reflections. Their faces were contorted into grotesque masks of glee, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. They were gesturing wildly, their hands mimicking the motions of guns and knives. It sent a shiver down my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the road ahead, but their behavior only escalated. They began to chant incoherently, their voices rising in pitch and fervor. The atmosphere in the car grew thick with tension, a palpable sense of danger lingering in the air. Despite my growing apprehension, I remained composed, determined to see the journey through to its end. I kept my eyes trained on the road, my hands steady on the wheel, but every instinct screamed at me to pull over and end the madness. Finally, we reached their destination, a quiet suburban street lined with darkened houses. I pulled up to the curb, relief flooding through me at the thought of ending the ordeal. But as I brought the car to a stop, a sudden jolt of pain ripped through my back, sending waves of agony coursing through my body. I turned in shock, my eyes widening in horror as I saw one of the girls brandishing a knife, its blade glinting in the faint glow of the streetlights. She lunged forward, stabbing at me with a frenzied desperation that sent shockwaves of terror rippling through my veins. Adrenaline surged through me as I fought to defend myself, grappling with my assailant in a desperate bid for survival. The other girl joined in the fray, her hands clawing at my face as she shrieked with manic laughter. Through sheer determination and a stroke of luck, I managed to fend them off long enough for help to arrive. The sound of approaching sirens shattered the night, drawing the attention of nearby residents who peered out from behind curtains, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. The police swarmed the scene, their presence a welcome sight amidst the chaos. They swiftly apprehended the assailants, dragging them away in handcuffs as I collapsed against the side of my car, my body trembling with shock and exhaustion. In the aftermath of the ordeal, as I lay recovering in a hospital bed, the events of that fateful night replayed in my mind like a never-ending nightmare. The dash-cam footage revealed the true extent of the girls' depravity, their sinister gestures and malevolent intentions captured in chilling detail. It was a sobering reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows, hidden beneath the veneer of normalcy. But amidst the darkness, there was also light, the unwavering bravery of those who came to my aid, and the resilience that carried me through the darkest hours of the night. As I reflected on the events that had unfolded, I knew that I would carry the scars, both physical and emotional, for the rest of my days. But I also knew that I was alive, a survivor of the night, testament to the indomitable spirit that dwells within us all.